You're here for season 7 of the Whole Horse Podcast, now at 110 episodes and counting. I'm your host, Alexa Linton, coming to you from Vancouver Island in Canada. I can't wait to continue to share thought-provoking, edge-pushing, geeky, and often challenging conversations with horse professionals from all areas of our industry who are working to make horses' lives better. This season, you can look forward to deep dives into equine bodywork and cranial work with my friend and colleague, Elise Miki, and much more on the specifics of creating enriching, healthy horse spaces, an area I'm particularly passionate about. I'm so excited that you're here listening in, meeting great horsey humans, and hopefully learning a new thing or two about horses and yourself. Let's get started. Hi, everybody. It's Alexa Linton here, and you're here for the Whole Horse Podcast. And I'm excited to welcome you back. Here we are in 2024 now. How has this happened? And it's going to be an amazing year for the podcast. I definitely seem to be having a bodywork focus through this season, and this podcast is no different. I'm very, very excited to welcome Christy DiColla here today. Welcome, Christy.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, I am excited as well. I always love to talk bodywork and horse bodies and just things that support horses. So I would love to start us off today to just get a bit more of a sense of your journey and you, because there's going to be listeners that have never heard of you or your work before. So can you share a little bit about you, how you came to the awareness you have about horses and horses' bodies that you have today? Like, how did that journey look for you?
Yes, I would love to. And I just wanted to let you know how happy I am to be here with you. I absolutely love your podcast and what you're doing.
Aww.
Thank you. Yes, I started this journey in the equine wellness industry about 20 years ago. When I decided to go to college, I went to UGA for animal science, and I thought I was going to go and be a vet. And I decided against that path, mostly because one of my friends was a vet and I would be out with my horse riding and she was never out there because she was working. So I said, no, I want to be with my horses. So just through a variety of circumstances, things that happened with my own horses, I decided to go and learn equine massage. And I went to Animal Dynamics, Equine Dynamics in Ocala, Florida, with Dawn and Lisa Duran, and they changed my life forever. And I've never looked back. They changed how I look at horses. They gave me a really solid foundation on anatomy and biomechanics and sports massage. And I just immediately fell in love with it. And I actually started massage not to do as a job, but just to empower myself to know more about my horses and to have more control over their livelihood so that I can make better decisions for them. And that's kind of why I started just working on the horses, and I really wanted to know their anatomy so I could just always be their number one advocate in their lives. So it was always for my own horses that I went down this path. And so I started working on the horses. I don't know, this is about 12 years ago, and I started working on my own horses, and there were 4 of them, and all of them had different soundness issues, as we do. And it was incredible. I had, a 20-year-old that could go straight and get canter to parts, and he would never want to be mounted. And all of a sudden he would just come up to the mounting block and wait for me. And I had a horse with kissing spine that his pain went away. And it was just amazing, amazing work. And I didn't even know what I was doing back then. I was just, fiddling around with the massage stuff that I learned. And so I started working on my friends' horses, and it started helping. So of course I was hooked. And then I said, you know what, this is what I want to do. This is amazing. And I just really love this work, and it's making a difference. And every time I couldn't figure something out, I came across a challenging case, I just went and learned something new. And I started taking CE courses for humans. So, and they let me in, they don't care. You just pay their money and, sit there and be quiet, and they let you learn. So that's what I did. And I started taking rock tape courses for kinesiotaping and cupping and all the things that they do. And they introduced me to Thomas Myers Works and anatomy trains. And I was like, this makes so much sense. I was always kind of working around the ribs because I would work on the ribs and the back would relax and the neck would relax and the hips were easier to work on. And I said, okay, I have to work on the ribs first. So I was kind of always doing that and really not knowing why. And as soon as I learned about anatomy trains, I'm like, okay, this is why. It's all connected. So then I was like, okay, this must exist in horses. And I started searching and there was nothing about it back then. And I found Ricky Schultz's amazing paper on it, her original paper. And I went and I read it and I devoured it. And of course, it was all the scientific names for the muscles. So I was like, okay, I can't understand this. So I went and drew them all out, each line. And I decided I wanted to make a program around the lines for bodywork like Thomas Myers did with people. And so that's what I've been working on for a while, for a really long time. And then about last year, I got my new iPhone and I decided for one particular horse that was having a chronic shoulder issue. For some reason on this horse, I decided to take a picture from above the horse, facing straight down. And didn't think anything of it. He had all of the issues that we see so often is we think the left side's overdeveloped, the right side's underdeveloped, the right shoulder's dropping, the left shoulder's high, the right hip was in an anterior tilt, all these normal things that we're seeing all the time. And this horse had a chronic shoulder issue in the right side. And it was like pinpointed in the humeroscapular joint. And everyone had saw him. I've been working on him for 6 months to a year. And every month his issues came back over and over and over. Osteopath, chiropractic, vets, radiographs were taken. They couldn't find anything in the neck and the shoulder. And I said, okay, fine. I'm just going to go back. For some reason, I decided to go on the functional line, the retraction line. And I got to this one spot and I started working on the ribs in this one area. And then all of a sudden, he had this huge release. The tissue relaxed all around the area, 6th, 7th rib. His right hip automatically just came out of the anterior tilt and he stood underneath himself and the right shoulder relaxed down. And he went into this state of complete relaxation. We've never seen him in it. And I said, well, wow, that was something there. And I kept working and noted it. And then afterwards, I took the picture from above again. And all of a sudden, that right atrophied side was no longer, quote unquote, atrophied and shorter. And the left shoulder had balanced out with the right had come up, the right hip, the hips were aligned. And he looked even from just looking at him from the top and the back and everything. And I was like, wait a minute, I thought this was atrophied muscle and underdevelopment I was looking at. So just by chance, the universe works. I happened to take a class with Thomas Myers the next week, and we were talking about assessments on people. And guess what we went over? Ribs and how there are rotations in ribs in people. And I was like, that's it. That's what I'm seeing in the horses is their ribs, the rib cage is rotated. So I went down this rabbit hole of just looking into the ribs, and I've been singularly focused on it. And more I learn, and more I think this is a syndrome that most horses are suffering from, where they have rib rotations. So yeah, that's kind of it.
Awesome. Well, as I shared before the podcast, I have a personal kind of interest in this as well as professional, because I still do work on some horses, but specifically my mare Raven has always had rib rotation and rib issues, nerve impingement stuff. I've talked about her on the podcast, probably overly much, but alas, here we are again. And I have a personal curiosity about what you have seen in terms of ribs specifically. So can you share a little bit more about, from that first moment with that horse to now, what you've learned, what's kind of opened up for you as far as how the ribs are influencing or affecting the other areas of the body, overall function?
Well, yes. So after that first case, I started looking all of them in this light. And I said to myself, I don't know enough about the ribs. I don't know enough about the costovertebral joints. I don't know enough about the sternum. Like I just didn't, we're not really taught that much. It's always, the pole, the neck, the shoulders, and the hips. And for some reason, we seem to be leaving out this big, important bridge in the middle where we're sitting. So what I think I've discovered, and I know a lot of us are seeing these same things because many people are calling me and saying, this is exactly what I'm seeing. And I'm like, yes. So is the first, there's 18 ribs. There's 2 pair on each side, but the first 8 ribs are joined dorsally and ventrally. So in dorsally, they're joined to the spine, okay, the first 8 vertebrae. And then underneath on the ventral side, they're joining to the sternum. So I've actually been able to kind of play with some skeletons now that people have given me. And what's happening is because they're joined top and bottom, whatever one side does, the other side has to do as well, because that's just the way it is, right? And then the rest of the ribs, they kind of go their own way depending on what's going on with the horse. Okay, so they can act singularly on that side. They don't have to do what the other side is doing. That makes sense? And then between that junction, that T8 through T10, I'm often seeing a twist there because of that, because the first 8 are going one direction, usually rotated upwards to the left. And then 8, 9, or 9, 10, they generally go the other direction or doing something else. So then we have they're literally being kind of locked and screwed down in that area, right where we're asking them to lift. So basically, generally, when we're looking at them from behind, or even we're sitting on top of them, that shoulder, that scapula, left scapula, is coming up in a caudal dorsal fashion, right? So it's high, it's enlarged, and then the right side is dipped down and it's collapsed forward and it's in a ventral position, usually, unless there's a hoof pathology, and then it raises up straight. And then it's a whole nother mess. But so when that happens, the entire horse is rotated to the left, the right side drops down, and then we drop down with it. And then, of course, most of us are stronger on our right sides because most of us are right side dominant, and we're driving in a car, overusing that right leg all the time. So then I believe we're driving in that asymmetry. And from horses that I have seen, it is us, the riders, that are driving in the asymmetry in the rib cage. I'm sure there is some natural asymmetries there. But when I work on polo horses or horses that are in drill teams where they have to hold a flag on the right side and bear down on the left, those horses have a right rotation, which to me means they're pushing the horse down on the left, and then those right ribs come up. And then they have the natural asymmetries elsewhere in their spine. So then those are trickier situations to unravel. But so let's just say we have a rotation to the left. The rib cage is rising on the left. The right side is going ventrally. The left side's going dorsally. Usually what will happen then, because of all the muscle attachments on the ribs, which I call rib slings, they will bring the tubercocci and the right pelvis down into an anterior tilt. So now you have a chronic anterior tilt to the right pelvis, which is always out. Every time the chiro comes out, it's always the right pelvis. And I know this because I've worked for a chiropractor for 6 months as his assistant, and it was 80% of the time the right pelvis. So when you do that and you kind of put your own body into that position, and you have to really feel it in yourself and kind of do this in your own body, you will see how we're setting up these lines of asymmetry all along the body, and it goes all the way up to the pole, the head, the eyes, because the horse is trying to always be level with the horizon. And then on top of it, we get on top of them, and when you do that with your body and you twist your ribs to the left, and your left shoulder is going to come back naturally, and the right shoulder is going to come forward, the right hip's going to come down, and your head is going to tilt to the left. Now, so you can see me, I'll show you in myself. So I'm just going to take my rib cage to the left right here, and my head did something, right? Along with it. But now if I'm a rider and if I'm a horse in this position, someone's going to say, no, you've got to be straight, even though my rib cage is still around this way. And I believe we're making this issue worse. And when I say there's an entrapment there, yes, there's some nerve entrapments there, but I haven't gone too deeply into that yet. And I think Celeste might help me with that. some. And we've been talking to her about it. So I'm really excited to explore that with her because she's kind of the expert right now on the nerves. I generally focus on the central nervous system as it relates to mechanical receptors in the fascia. So what I'm finding is there's densifications or fibrosis along muscle attachments on the ribs that are locking them into this position. So if you think of all the muscles that are attaching onto the ribs that have to do with expiration, inhalation, they have to do with locomotion, your thoracic sling, you have your thoracic serratus attaching onto the ribs, and the origin is on the ribs of the thoracic serratus, which is where all the tension goes, is in the origin. You have your external obliques, the internal obliques, your transverse abdominis, your iliocostolus, your quadratus lumborum, which is your iliocostolus lumborum in horses. All those things. Oh, and your psoas. Your psoas are attaching onto the 18th rib too. So there are all of these soft tissue attachments on the ribs for both breathing and locomotion. And it's, I think, common sense if we start thinking of it like that. And if the horse is using itself in an unbalanced way, that rotations would get locked in place by fibrotic tissue and densifications in the fascia onto the ribs. So
very interesting. So I guess as a body worker, and particularly like with an osteopathic understanding, my mind always goes to like, what is the starting point for this? If you're seeing so many horses in a very similar compensation, shall we call it? And I admit both my girls, that tends to be the issue where the sternum glides left. So like that left rotation of the rib cage. And then with my one mare, it's impingement down the left front, which has resulted in early onset arthritis, like diagnosis age 4 in the front left limb. And my sense is that is in part caused by nerve impingement and changes down that front left leg. So for me, looking at her being diagnosed at 4 and already having changes much before she was ridden or, had much human intervention, for example, do you have any sense why horses, kind of carry this particular compensation from your understandings of fascia or other things? What might be the reasoning that they would have this specific pattern in their system?
Well, I would have to guess it's from being in the womb, right? Yeah. And how they're laying in the womb. And we are that way too. All living beings are. If you look at dogs, they are that way. If you watch a dog running from behind. So I think it's, just from how they were in the womb. And there's some people doing some work with foals and birth trauma. Yep. Yes, but I think it would make sense of how they were laying in the womb, honestly.
Yeah, and that's what I've wondered about with Raven was, okay, what was happening in the womb? And also, how did the birth go? And then I remember Celeste talking about horses foals that don't fully kind of unwind the thoracic sling from that early age as well, and how that can affect, all the flow down, the front legs, but beyond that as well. That really hit me hard when she talked about that. I was like, oh my goodness, I think we're on to something here.
Yeah, it's all connected, and fascia is just amazing when you really start studying it. Yeah. And osteopathy, it's like that's what's connecting everything there, and that's kind of I tell everyone that's our roadmap, really, into finding the issue. And so when I'm working on the horses and someone will present a new issue, like we just did a certification class in bodywork, one of the courses, and it was 6 days. And one of the students brought, God bless her, she's so sweet and amazing. She brought a horse that had head shaking syndrome. And at first I was like, oh my goodness, how are you going to learn on this horse? You're trying to just learn massage and this horse can't be touched, right? And I just did with this horse what I do with every horse is just work on the tissue and work the lines and see what unfolds and see what we get and see where the tissue takes us and just see what happens. And that's kind of what I do with every horse I work on. People want answers. What's wrong? What's causing this? And I literally just say, I don't know. this could be it. And I talk about the rotations and this and that. And I say, let's just work on them and let's just get all of those restrictions out of their body. Let's try to balance them out and basically connect the dots of the myofascial kinetic lines. Because I say, there's traffic jams in there and everything's having to be rerouted around this densified fibrotic tissue, right? So let's just get everything going again. Let's get the energetics connected in the system. And I say that the problem will reveal itself by the end of the session, and it always does. And some things are being helped that I didn't even think would be helped from this therapy, like head shaker or horse's anhidrosis. I never went into it thinking, oh, I'm going to help this horse. And just like, let's just work on the tissue and see what we get. So in my classes, that's what I say. Let's not go in with any preconceived notions of what we can achieve or what we think it can be. Let's just listen to what the tissue is telling us. And that's kind of the whole premise behind osteopathy too. So
the body is a self-regulating system, right?
yes.
When you give it what it needs, then and listen and dialogue, then it naturally moves closer and closer to a sense of self-regulation and functionality. Yeah.
I know. And then with this, this work in the rib cage and all the connections to the rib cage, and then you have that deep ventral line and the connection of the pericardium to the sternum, then to the lungs, then to the diaphragm, then to the psoas. And this has all been proven by Ricky Schultz and her absolutely amazing, groundbreaking work. It's like, how can so many issues not be directly influenced by what's happening in the rib cage? And if the ribs cannot fully expand and that joint cannot have a full range of motion, to me personally, it's only logical sense that then that negative pressure can't be created in the lungs for air to flow into it. So if the lungs aren't able to expand, because that's how it works, right? There's a negative pressure, a diaphragm contracts, it pulls the lungs back, the rib cage opens up, air flows in, and that's how we oxygenate our system. So if the rib cage is no longer, those ribs are no longer moving in their full range of motion and expanding to their full extent, to me, it's just logical that they are not getting enough oxygen into their systems, and that's affecting the whole system. It's affecting everything, I think. So I'm doing some research right now, and I'm trying to get 50 horses, and I'm testing like 4 or 5 different things on them all at once and doing them 2 sessions about 2 weeks apart. So it's a lot of work, but I'm getting some good results, and I think we can connect it and show how respiration improves, resting heart rate or return resting heart rate improves. I'd like to show that VO2 max improves, like some really interesting things that if you just can get the rib cage functioning and balanced and just some improvement there, And I believe, yes, there are some natural asymmetries and there's some things happening with the bones, and there's a lot of research being done with
super interesting. I find rib cage very, very interesting for a number of reasons. Like you said, there's many joints, and the connection to the nervous system for me is one that's really fascinating, in that with the autonomic nervous system, all of those sympathetic ganglions sitting in front of the rib heads, right? So if we're not getting rib mobility, we have, and you've probably seen this in your work, is that sympathetic nervous system just doesn't turn off in the same way. So that horse, in terms of regulation of the autonomic nervous system, and that hopefully graceful movement between sympathetic and parasympathetic just doesn't happen in the same way, because we've got compression at the rib heads, compressing the sympathetic ganglions and sort of keeping the gas pedal on, so to speak. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And that's exactly it. And once you get the ribs mobilized and all that tension released, most of them go into, especially the first time, they go into a state, looks like they're drugged, just because you have helped them get into a parasympathetic state, which is really beautiful. And it's a really beautiful experience to be there with them and help them through that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like this horse with this head shaking syndrome. I mean, I had no idea. Like, I didn't think, like, even now, I was like, I don't know. Like, I don't know if we're gonna be able to help this. This should be a head issue, or you know what I mean? It's something else. And so I taught this class. We do the rib slings and we learn all the muscles, origin insertions, a little bit of innervation, the fascial lines, and we do that first. And so I said, we're going to do the rib slings first. I'm just going to teach it how I work on the horse. And so each day we work on a different part of the horse. So the first day was the rib slings. And I'm telling you, this horse got some relief, about 60 to 70% relief. The head shaking went away just from doing what I'm terming the rib slings, which was amazing to me because I immediately wanted to go and try to do some vagal gland work, vagus nerve work, and like work on his occipital lobe, just work on his face. And it wasn't happening, right? I was trying to calm him down so that we could even touch him. So he wasn't even letting us get to his neck, get to his head, none of that. So I was like, well, okay, we're just going to do the rib slings. And he immediately felt better.
Amazing. Amazing. So I want to get into fascia. It's one of my favorite areas to talk about, especially because I think finally, I mean, for years, it seemed like, oh, we have to just dissect through fascia to get to all the other important stuff. And now it's like, okay, the fascia is a thing that we need to learn about. And it seems more and more like information is coming through, research is being done. It's like, I see the work with anatomy trains with Tom Myers, also the work with Gil Hadley and dissection, and many others. I'm not an expert in this field, although I hope to become more and more proficient. I'm actually taking a fascial trains course for humans in January, which I'm quite excited about. So I love to chat more about this. Can you tell us a little more specifically about fascia and sort of what you understand of more current research about the role of fascia, first of all, and then I want to get into like what the trains are, what these chains are about.
Well, there's a lot of current research on it, and Robert Schleip and Carlo and Antonio Stecco, the Stecco family, and Helen Langevin are there's a lot of amazing research on it right now with people. Gosh, I wish I had my big notebook with me. I'm looking for it right now. But I have a huge binder of just all of these research papers. And one of the things they're starting to do, especially Antonio Stecco, just some really neat research they did with the fascia is he researched front limb fascia and interconnected the deep digital flex, the retinaculum around the fetlock, the deep digital flexor tendon, and the tensor fascia on a brachii are all interconnected by fascia, and they're a big shock absorber for functionally coupled shock absorber for the front limb. And that's what they did. And that happens to be part of the rib slings I'm working on. I'm like, okay, well, there it is. But fascia, I think one of the neatest things about it that I learned from all the research is its connection with hyaluronic acid and the amount of hyaluronin that is in the fascia. And when I learned about that, I was like, oh, in the extracellular matrix, and the hyaluronin is binding to water, and that's what's basically keeping us lubricated and hydrated is the hyaluronin in fascia. That's what's helping the slide and glide in between the different layers of fascia, from superficial to deep, the deep in between each muscle, the deep fascia in between the muscles, and then there's deep fascia in between each individual muscle. And that's kind of it's not kind of, it's what's helping everything move fluidly, literally fluidly, with the hyaluronin and the water against each other. So everything could be functionally coupled together in these kinetic lines for correct posture, balance, and for fluid movement. Because we're not robots, right? Walking around. We're not Lego people. And so it's not just my bicep that's contracting and the tricep that's releasing to create this movement of flexion, right? My arm. Many things had to work together all at once simultaneously to create these movements that we're making, right? And we're always talking about horses, their diagonals and the trot and this and that. These are myofascial lines that are interconnecting. These are different muscles that are interconnecting via the fascia to create this movement, this fluid movement. And that's why I say it's connecting the dots. And if you know of the different junctures and the fans that are coming off these different functions, you can then work intelligently on the horse. But yeah, my main thing is interfacing with the hyaluronan, because that's what's getting densified.
Yeah.
It's different than fibrosis, right? So we can directly influence hyaluronan, and it's been shown by Antonio Stecco of different treatments, because they're doctorates and PhDs, obviously, but they are also myofascial specialists. And so they have shown how myofascial release techniques and pinning some tissue and stretching it away from it, and different techniques and heat therapy and things like that, how it could literally melt clogged up and densified hyaluronan. Think of hyaluronan as kind of like honey, right? And if it doesn't move, it can self-aggregate and get sticky and clogged up, just like honey does if it sits on a shelf too much. But if you heat it up, then it flows again nicely. And that's exactly what they have found through science-based research that the hyaluronan in the fascia is doing. So I think that's how we're creating all of these amazing results with horses, is we are getting basically all this densified tissue moving through the system now, and getting healthy hyaluronan produced with the movements we're making as well.
Yeah. And I've been seeing some really neat graphics around sort of dissection photos and video around because we're often taught, even as body workers, I think, to see things in a very compartmentalized sort of individual way. Okay, the nerves are here, the blood vessels are here, this is here, like the organs are here. And when we think about something like fascia, like I just went to the nerve tour with Gil Headley, and I would highly recommend it. It was so great.
Oh my gosh, I'm so jealous.
It was so great. But one of the things that he talks a lot about is how, number one, that the blood and the nerve, so the heart and the brain are just constantly together. So if you have a big nerve pathway, you basically have a vein or an artery with it all the time. Yes. So that was really, really cool. And I knew that, but like seeing the photos was like, oh. And then the other thing that was so interesting was to see how the nerves were completely invested in the fascia. So we kind of have this sense sometimes, I think, where it's like, well, the nerve is a separate thing from the fascia, and then and it's not at all. So like, literally someone like moving a nerve, and it moves the whole fascial system. And when you start to think that way, you go, wow, okay, so if I have, say fibrosis in fascia, or I lose the slide and glide, or I have scar tissue, or I have, other things occurring, then what is happening to my nerves? Then what is happening to my blood flow? Then what is happening to my lymph flow in that tissue, right? Which is, I think, why we can have these incredibly like miraculous changes in a horse or a human. Or like, how did that shift like that? And like you said earlier, I thought it was an atrophied muscle, but now it looks fine. It's like, oh, the fluids are actually moving through there now.
Yeah,
exactly. So cool.
Kier Schumacher, she's on anatomy trains with Thomas Myers. He offers some courses. She does amazing work on this, on how, and she calls it neurovascular work. And I've taken, I think, all of her classes, and it's basically how the fascia and the vascular work and the nerves are intertwined. And her work is where she helps release fascia restrictions, and it helps the whole vascular network. And yeah, it's really interesting science if you really go into it. But fascia is actually around the nerves and the veins and the arteries, right? That's what the epineurum is, the perineurium is, and there are these little fascial sheets around literally each individual axon of the nerves, the entire nerve itself, every fascicle, it's all covered with fascia. Yeah. So it's amazing when you start looking at it, and it's the same thing with the muscle. So when I really started looking into this too, and the anatomy of it, muscle fibers and nerve fibers are literally the same exact setup on how they are put together in a muscle spindle fiber and a nerve fiber. Same thing. Like they go from, I mean, if you think about the anatomy of a peripheral nerve, you've got the axon, and then you've got many axons to go into a fascicle, and then many fascicles to go into the entire nerve, right? It's the same thing with the muscle, and they're all covered with fascia. So, and then also with the fascia, you have coming from these each individual nerve, you have your mechanical receptors in the fascia itself. There are different kind of mechanical receptors that are in the fascia that do different things and talk to different parts of the brain. So, that's why all our light touch therapy works, is because you are stimulating the interoreceptors that are going to the insula part of the brain. And the insula part of the brain is different than everything else going to the prefrontal cortex. And the insula part of the brain is that part of the brain that basically is your wellness center. Do I like something? Do I not like something? Is this a threat, or does this make me happy? Right. And so your interoreceptors, or C nerve fibers, go to that part of the brain, and they talk to that part of the brain to tell you if some interoreception you're feeling or exteroreception you're feeling is a good thing or not. So we can actually basically stimulate these interoreceptors in a very, very particular way to get through the threat response when we're working on the horses ourselves, so that we can then get into the deeper tissue. So that's kind of what we're doing with when I call neurofascial conditioning, is we talk to the interoreceptors first to get rid of that brace. So then we can go in deeper and start doing some different kinds of work in the deep fascia, and talk to different mechanical receptors down there. Like you have your Rufinis, you have Golgi nerve apparatuses, muscle spindle fibers, all the things, right?
It's so neat. And I find as well, so like I've worked a lot with like permissions over my bodywork career, was something that my teacher taught me 20 years ago. And I was like, ha, and I try to use it every time I work with horses and people. Obviously, generally when people show up here, they're pretty into it. But with horses, it's not always the case. And I loved how Celeste had talked about like closed versus open. So that sense, and I see this with fascia, because I really sense with fascia that it has such a deep relationship to our state, just our general, am I okay? Am I safe? Do I need to protect myself? Can I open? Like all of these pieces, I see this with human clients, say that if someone's had a really hard emotional time, or they've had a fall, for example, and you feel it in the fascia, it's a state in the fascia of almost like a freeze response in the fascia, right? And we think about that, what you talked about with the hyaluron is like, it makes so much sense. This hydration, this water within the fascia that's so inherent, changes state literally to that freeze response, and then opens into a more fluid response when the system's more available and open. So can you tell me a little bit more about anything that you've noticed that way, as far as like a closed or open state, or a sense of when a horse's body is what are the keys to like that sort of receptivity to the work, I guess?
Yep, that's exactly what we're exploring with all of this, is asking permission and acceptance of our touch. So going in layer by layer, and it's all about the interoreception of the system, and how basically the fascia is how it's perceiving what you're doing to it, which is why we're talking to those interoreceptors and those C nerve fibers. And what happens is, well, let me backtrack. So I think it's really cool when I learned this, is that the fascia is talking to the brain and telling the brain about what's going on in the body. And that's basically, and that's some other things as well, right? But that's basically what interoreception is, right? Is the fascia is picking up signals of what's happening and sending it to the brain, and the brain decides what it's going to do with that information, right? So we can talk to the fascia. It's right underneath our skin. So we get to tell the brain what we think should be happening in an area. So very quickly, if you do this very specific work with them, they will let you in and they'll be like, okay, this area is okay for you to touch because you've stimulated the interoceptors and it sent those signals up to the brain. And then the brain then sent signals down and said, okay, this is okay now. But what happens is if there's densified or fibrotic tissue or nerve impingements and vascular entrapments, what happens is the interoreceptors send information to the brain and say, there's nothing happening right here, right? It kind of blocks it off. Just like if you were in a traffic jam, it would block off that area if there was a big accident or something, or, whatever happens. And then that road stops being used and the brain will then reroute you around that road and it perceives that area as painful. And so there's a lot of research going on right now about what's, chicken or the egg, are the interoreceptors, perceiving something as being painful because there's a blockage there for various reasons and sending that information up to the brain, and the brain says, okay, well, that area is painful, so let's just stop using it. And then you stop using it. And then it does become painful for real. They have, there's one study done, I think it's by Helen Langevin. It's very interesting on how, and they're doing a lot of studies, especially Robert Schleip, on how you need to move a certain way to keep the fascia lubricated and functioning properly. And they did a study, and I know this is a little cruel, but they immobilized one muscle or a few muscle fibers in a rat. Okay. I don't know how they did it, but they did it. It's in the research paper. And what happened within a matter of weeks is that immobilized muscle fiber looked like a aged muscle fiber and the amount of fibrotic tissue it had in it just from not moving. So everything needs to be moving and functioning properly for us to not perceive pain in an area. So it's like this very big afferent feedback loop that's going on. And fascia, the fascia is what's basically communicating all that information to the brain. And we as body workers can change that, which I think is really cool.
Totally.
Yeah.
I before we get into the fascial chain stuff, which I want to talk about, I have it, and perhaps I don't know if it's a controversial question, but I am becoming increasingly convinced that for many of our horses, their main issue is that they don't move enough, that our environments do not provide enough stimulation, enrichment, and space for them to actually move enough to have the slide and glide occur in their fascial systems, have things moving enough that they don't, that fibrosis kind of quality doesn't come into their tissues. What is your sense of that?
I completely agree. 110%. Yeah. Horses that they're stalled for long periods of time are definitely stiffer in general. And that's the best word to say for it, is they're stiffer, among other issues that are going on there. And I understand, I don't want to come down on anyone about it, because I moved to California and I was in California for a few years, and most of their stabling there is, unfortunately, they don't have the room. They don't have the green grass like we do here in Georgia and other places. And so most of the horses there are stabled for a bit, and they try to do turnouts for them. And like for my horse, I actually bought him 2 12x24 stalls and took out the middle. So he actually had a 24x24 area all the time to walk around in. And so I'm not trying to, situations are what they are, but yeah, horses need to move, bodies need to move, we need to move. And if anyone doubts that, just go look into Robert Schleip's, his work. And he's just researched this a lot, and he's amazing. And he's dedicated his life's work to this. And he's a rolfer, but he's also a doctor. And that's all he does is research on this. And it's basically he has a program called fascial training.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Because it's my kind of new area of focus here is around creating movement enriching environments for horses. Because as a body worker, I just got so frustrated I feel so frustrated with how many horses I just couldn't seem to help on a real lasting level. So yeah, that's cool. I'll check out that research. So I wanted to circle back around to the what can be called fascial chains or fascial trains. And you also bring in the word kinetic. And I was laughing earlier because when you were talking about fascia, my cat was like jumping off everything and leaping around and being crazy. And I was thinking a lot about like tensegrity and like, kinetic chains and, like having her like leaping around. It's like, oh, that's a good reminder about fascia and this sense of the role of fascia in, jumping and leaping and amazing types of movement and just like these kinetic chains that can create this incredible range of movement, I suppose. So can we chat a little bit more about that?
Yes. So I'm not saying I'm an expert on this. I've been studying it for a really long time. So I just wanted to put that out there. I think Ricky Schultz is the expert on this for horses. So I'd always refer to her work on it. I've just been trying to figure out how to work on it and studying it. But how I look at them is I try to make everything as simple as possible when I'm studying something. And I just try to break it down to its most basic level. So this is how I explain them as kinetic lines. Well, there's a lot of things going on. So the most basic I say is if you go through this myofascial lines and you look at them, you will notice that generally speaking, they go origin to insertion, origin to insertion, origin, insertion. And so where one insertion, one muscle and the insertion of it ends, the origin of another begins. Okay. And they're all kind of intersecting around joints or bones as well. Okay. So all they're doing is linking up different joints to create movement or help stabilize the body. That's basically all they are. And that's why they're kinetic, because kinetics are movement, right? So there's also the piezoelectric effect that's going on there that's being studied. And also there's a hydraulic effect that's going on. And that's what's helping with the spring of the lower legs coming up from the hoof up through the body, is there's basically stored energy in the myofascial kinetic lines due to the hyaluronan and the water content there. So it's a pressurized system as well. And then there's piezoelectric effect as well in there. So there's a lot to unpack with all of that. And I'm still really studying the piezoelectric effect because I believe that's kind of how I'm helping mobilize the ribs. It has something to do with that. So that's actually what I'm studying, and the electric density in the tissue before and after and things like that. But there's a lot of studies and research on this in humans. And a little bit on horses right there. But yeah, the kinetic lines, if you just want to think of the lines as one muscle connecting to another to perform a certain function, they're kind of easy to understand. So let's see, I'll take an easy one, the functional line. Okay. The functional line is helping us with horses and us connect one hip to the other shoulder. Okay. So in a functional line, this is where you get a left stifle issue and a right scapular issue, and they are functionally coupled. So let's say we have a rib rotation to the left. Okay, let's just say this. So the right side is atrophied, or I'm not even going to say that anymore. The right side is in a cranial ventral position. Okay, it's rotated downwards. Okay, so when you get on your horse, you're basically falling off to the right all the time. Okay, and you have to put shims in your saddle. So we're in that kind of situation. So what's happening there is your latissimus dorsi then is going to be stretched. Generally, it's stretched and it's has some densified tissue there, right in that 6th, 7th, 8th rib. Okay, so that latissimus dorsi then is attaching into thoracolumbar fascia. Then we're on their functional line, starting on the right. Pops over the back onto the opposite side to your gluteal fascia, okay, through the thoracolumbar fascia right there, which is obviously you're probably thinking about this. You're like, oh gosh, that's where all they have their torques at is T18L1, right? Right where that crossing is going over. It goes your gluteal fascia, and then it comes down your tensa fascia lata, and it comes around on the patella joint, up the gracilis, then it comes back over to the side it started through aponeurosis fascia, and then it connects into the rectus abdominis to go back right where it started by latissimus dorsi. Okay, so this is wrapping around the body. So now you can see if the latissimus dorsi is tight, and if you believe that this line exists and the fascia is interconnecting it all, if latissimus dorsi is restricted and tight and say shortened, which it generally is, it's going to pull that left hip up and cause a lateral deviation of the left stifle. Okay, so now we have a lateral deviation of the left stifle. We have a stifle issue and a right shoulder issue that is functionally coupled. So that's kind of how I look at it. So when we're working on the body, I'm not doing it direct line, like, oh, I've got a shoulder issue or I got a stifle issue. I say, what line is this connected to? What muscle, what joint, this joint I'm working on, say the left stifle has heat and inflammation and there are things happening there. I am going to connect it with all the lines to make sure the rest of the line is relaxed and free of tension before I go back to that and address that. I don't know if that helped you answer that question.
Yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, like it's so neat to like learning the myofascial releases and things. I think the neat thing about fascia is it actually tends to be pretty open to working with you and opening and finding its sliding glide again. Again, that auto, that auto regulation piece, it wants to return to a state of functionality and health is what I find. Yeah.
It's amazing. It's so much fun to work with because it gives you immediate results.
Yeah, totally.
If it can. And if it can. So this is why when I'm, teaching people that are in my classes, I say if something doesn't give right away, then it's somewhere else. Go somewhere else. Don't dig in that place and don't get trapped in that tissue trying to get what you want to get in that area. Just go somewhere else along the myofascial line, and now you have your roadmaps that you can just like, okay, what I wanted to happen here didn't happen. Let me go to the next one down the line and work there. And then if you that's how I work around the body. And then I come back to the first thing that I perceive to be the issue. And then I go and try to get that tissue to change. And usually it does after I work the entire line.
I love that. Yeah. I often think in my work, it's like less is more, because I think as body workers, it's really easy to jump on kind of like, oh, I'm seeing this tight muscle and I need to release it and get really sort of fixated on that. Whereas that, when we can open up our sense of things and broaden our awareness, like you say, it's like, if that tissue doesn't release, let's not force it.
Yes.
There's a reason, and let's listen to the tissues and work with them. Yeah. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. And that's why I love the fascia and I love the kinetic lines, because it just everything makes sense when you learn them. Everything about the body starts making sense. And then you can just intelligently think through things and then come up with a protocol to work on each individual horse based on what you're seeing, instead of finding, restricted tissue, restricted joints, and just trying to work on that one area to get an outcome. You can just start thinking now more globally than just in one area. Yeah. So I just love fascia. I love the kinetic lines, and it just, for me, it helps everything make more sense and gets results. So that's what I like.
Getting results is wonderful. There's nothing better than feeling like that sense of watching a horse that's just like, happier, healthier, more functional. It's like, oh, that feels so good to see that, I think, for all of us.
Yeah, that's kind of what it's all about. So yeah.
For the horse, for sure. I love it. Well, we're wrapping up our conversation here, Christy. It's been a wonderful time chatting with you. I would love to hear how people get in touch with you and find your work.
Well, thank you so much. I so enjoyed this conversation. You're just amazing to talk to. I love this. So you can go on my website, www.zenma, Zenma wellness, wellness.com. And there's more information about some courses that I'm offering. And I will be offering some online courses, but I don't think I'm going to be teaching rib entrapment online. I haven't decided yet, but I'm just trying to figure out how to exactly do that, because some of the techniques we use look like we're doing one thing and really it's this really soft release. But if you look at it, it looks like something else. So I'm trying to work out how to teach that online. I'm not sure if I'm going to, or if it just has to be in person. And then I have some other instructors that have gone through the whole program that are LMTs that I'm teaching. They're going to be teaching it too. But
Oh,
yeah.
wonderful. Okay, great. So head on over to Christy's website if you're wanting to learn more. And yeah, it's again, appreciate your time today, Christy. This has been a really interesting conversation.
Thank you so much.
Hmm. All right, everyone. Thanks for listening in. I hope you learned a thing or two like I did, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.